Imagine being taken from your home, your beauty ranked, your body groomed, your future decided by a man that you have never met. You didn't choose to wear a crown, but now you are. And somehow the fate of your entire people rests on what you do next. Let's talk about Esther. This isn't a nightmare or a fairy tale. It's the story of one of the most misunderstood women in the Bible, one whose courage didn't roar, but whispered through prayer, discernment, and holy timing. Her story has been softened in children's books and in sermons that skipped over all the complexity. But when we take a closer look through the lens of history, context, power, and pain, we find a woman who skillfully navigates patriarchy, racism, imperialism, and fear. Hi, I'm Tammy Jackson, and this video is part of my Leading Ladies of the Bible series. Here we take a close look at biblical women's stories, real women with complex lives, so that we can discover what they teach us about how we find our own voice, we walk in our purpose, and we live with the kind of courage that it takes to show up today in the world. If you're already feeling it, go ahead and hit the like button. That'll tell YouTube that you want more content like this, and it'll help others find it too. Let's get into it. Here's what I want you to know up front. Context matters. When we're trying to hear what God is saying to us today, we have to understand what was happening back then. We have to name the systems, the suffering, and the survival. And only then can we make faithful spiritual conclusions. So let's talk about the world that Esther lived in. Esther is a young Jewish woman living in exile in Persia who becomes a queen and later risks her life to stop a plot to destroy her people. To really understand Esther's story, we have to go back in time. After the reign of King Solomon, the nation of Israel split into two. The northern kingdom is still called Israel. The southern kingdom is called Judah. In 722 BCE, the Assyrian Empire conquered the northern kingdom, and the Israelites were exiled and scattered. That's where the idea of the lost tribes of Israel comes from. Judah held on a little longer, but in 586 BCE, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon destroyed Jerusalem and the temple and exiled the Jews to Babylon. Then in 539 BCE, the Persian Empire under King Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon. The Jewish people now go from being subjects of the Babylonian Empire to being subjects of the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire was enormous and vast. It stretched from India to Ethiopia. And by the time we find Esther, she's living in Susa, the capital of the Persian Empire under King Xerxes, who's also called King Ahasuerus. He ruled from 486 to 465 BCE. When our story opens, King Xerxes has a queen, Queen Vashti, but she disobeys the king. She refuses to be paraded in front of his guests. So he banishes her. He then issues a new decree. He wants them to round up all the beautiful virgins of the empire and bring them to the palace. He would, after spending at least one night with each of them, choose a new queen. This is often described like a beauty pageant. Maybe we do that because we're cleaning it up for children, or maybe we're leaning away from what makes us so very uncomfortable. But this was not the Miss America scholarship system at work. This was state-sponsored objectification under a patriarchal regime. Esther chapter 2, verse 8 tells us that Esther was taken. Scholar Michael Fox describes her as putty, not because she lacked character, but because she's being shaped by a situation that she didn't choose and she can't control. Still, there were probably some women who went willingly into this system. When patriarchy is the water you swim in, survival can masquerade as ambition. As scholar Rachel Adamman notes, internalized patriarchy convinces many women that this is their only shot at safety, honor, or visibility. And that's not just ancient history. Today, women are still being taught that their value is tied to their appearance, to compliance, and to pleasing power. The patriarchy is still alive and well, and it's pretty invisible to many who've adapted to it. Once Esther is taken into the king's harem, she doesn't rebel, but she also doesn't surrender her identity either. She adapts, she listens, and she watches. Esther chapter 2, verse 15 tells us that when the turn came for Esther, she asked for nothing other than what Hegai, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the harem, suggested. And Esther won the favor of all who saw her. This verse tells us something really powerful. Esther pays attention to the people who know how the system works. She doesn't try to game it. She doesn't become a manipulator. And she doesn't tear others down. But she does listen. She learns and she moves with quiet discernment. That's not passivity. That's very often wisdom. That's spiritual intelligence. Esther knows that if she has to be in this place, she's going to learn how to move through it with dignity and with strength. Sometimes the holiest thing that we can do is not to rage against the system, but to refuse to let the system strip us of our dignity, our discernment, our compassion, and our integrity. Esther's wisdom and her beauty earns her the crown. But the real test doesn't come with a title. It comes when power and politics outside the palace walls collide. While Esther is quietly rising in the king's favor, two men, Mordecai and Haman, are about to set a much bigger story into motion. One with consequences that will force Esther to decide exactly what kind of queen she will be. King Xerxes promotes a man named Haman, a high-ranking Hegai official, and commands everyone to bow down before him. But Mordecai refuses. We have a clash of integrity and ego. Haman becomes enraged, so enraged that he doesn't just go after Mordecai, he targets all of the Jews. This isn't just personal, it's political, it's genocidal. That's how quickly hatred can spread when it is paired with unchecked power. One act of defiance can become justification for mass violence. And just like that, the stage is set. Mordecai is standing firm, Haman is raging, Esther is still blissfully unaware, but she's about to be called into a moment that will define her life and that of her people. Once Haman is upset, he wastes no time. He spins a vague but dangerous narrative to the king. He says,
"There's a group of people in your empire who don't follow your laws. It's not in your best interest to tolerate them."
In Esther chapter 3, we hear Haman's words,
"If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will put 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury."
No names, no facts, just fear and bribes and political theater. And the king? The king just hands Haman his signet ring and says, "Do whatever you please." That's how easy it is for injustice to succeed. Injustice often comes dressed in diplomacy, funded by power, and authorized by silence. Let's remember that Haman isn't just mad at Mordecai. He's hateful toward Mordecai's entire people. He calls them different, separate, and dangerous. This is racism. This is xenophobia, the demonization of an immigrant people. And it doesn't end with rhetoric. It turns into policy. Haman manipulates Xerxes, and Xerxes complies, signing off on the extermination of an entire ethnic group because one man offended one official. This kind of thing still happens. The Hamans of today still villainize the vulnerable and recruit the powerful, sometimes openly and sometimes under the radar. And the Xerxes of today, they still hand Haman the pen. After Haman persuades King Xerxes to issue a decree to annihilate the Jews, Mordecai goes to Esther and urges her to intervene. He sends her word and says,
"You must reveal who you are. You must go to the key and save your people."
Esther is initially hesitant. She knows that this could be taking her life into her own hands. If she goes to the king without being called for, he might kill her. Things could go badly for her, and she has to weigh the dangers of risking her life or risking the death of her people. Mordecai has to remind her who she is and where she came from, that she is one of them, no matter where she may find herself. In Esther chapter 4, we hear him saying to her,
"Who knows but what you have come into this royal position for such a time as this?"
That phrase is inspiring, but it also carries an awful lot of weight. Mordecai isn't just encouraging her. He's putting the fate of an entire people on her shoulders. Scholars like Fox and Adelman note the shift in tone that takes place here. Mordecai moves from protector to pressure point. Up until now, Mordecai has always looked out for Esther's welfare. Now, her welfare becomes secondary to the very existence of her entire people. And sometimes that's what support looks like. It means showing the reality, situating our place in what is happening, and applying some pressure and some urgency that borders on coercion. Esther does respond, but she doesn't rush. She fasts, she prays, she reflects, she calls on her community, because what she is about to do cannot just be brave. It must be strategic. It must be spiritual. It must be subversive. 3 days later, she's ready. This is not the same hesitant woman that Mordecai first urged into action. Prayer and preparation have transformed her. She steps forward, clothed not just in her royal robes, but in clarity and courage. She invites King Xerxes to a banquet and invites Haman to join him. Then she invites them to another banquet. She's not stalling. She's being strategic. Why would she have 2 banquets instead of just one? Well, that's because hearts soften over time. Connection develops when we share meals over tables, when we have conversations, when we get to know one another. It's because timing matters. Esther is building tension and connection, and she is preparing for the moment when her voice will shift everything. In Esther chapter 7, we hear her say to the king,
"If I have found favor, grant me my lice, and spare my people."
She doesn't argue policy, she makes it personal. When injustice becomes personal, it becomes undeniable. That's how systems start to crack. When the abstract becomes embodied, when the invisible becomes visible, and when the victim becomes your neighbor, your friend, your family. Esther asks for the lives of her people, and the king listens. Haman ends up being executed on the gallows that were intended for Mordecai. It is a form of poetic justice, but this story doesn't end there, and it doesn't end clean and easy. There's a twist. The king can't just undo his edict. In Persian law, once a royal decree has been sealed with the king's signet ring, it cannot be changed. So because he cannot rescind the order, King Xerxes offers Esther and Mordecai a workaround. They can write a new decree in the king's name. This loophole becomes their lifeline. Esther doesn't just plead for justice, she steps into the work of shaping it. She and Mordecai draft a new decree, one authorizing the Jews to defend themselves. This is still, however, an imperfect solution. But in an unjust system, even the solutions will still be messy. When harm can't be undone, justice will always come at a cost. And the cost here is going to be bloodshed and death. This decree reveals a hard truth. Haman wasn't the only one filled with hate. The violence didn't die with him. There were others, neighbors, officials, bystanders, ordinary-seeming people who were still ready to carry out his orders. However, now, when they lift their swords, the Jews are going to be empowered to defend themselves. And this is the part of the story that can be really difficult. There is no warm and fuzzy feeling victory. Nobody gets to take a victory lap here. There isn't an "and they lived happily ever after" ending. This is a survival response. We don't want to glorify the killing, but we also can't ignore the brutality that led to it either. What this does give us is a faithful witness to what it means to survive, to resist, and to write a new ending to a story that was threatening to erase you. Esther's story is not simple, it's not clean, it's not safe, and maybe that's the point. She's living under patriarchy. She's living in an imperial system. She's navigating racism, coercion, and moral risk. She doesn't come out of this untouched, but she comes out faithful to who she was created to be. This story gives us 3 theological truths that I believe we just can't ignore. The first one is that racism, patriarchy, and empire are not new, and they are still wearing religious and political masks today. Our job comes to see them, to recognize them, and to know when the time has come for us to stand up to them. The second theological truth is that systemic evil requires both bold actors and silent enablers to thrive. But every one of us gets to choose who we will be. You can choose to be Haman, driven by hate and willing to exploit power to destroy others. You can be Xerxes, privileged, uninformed, and easily manipulated into authorizing or allowing harm. You can choose to be one of the bystanders, complicit through compliance, following rules without any critical thinking. Or you can choose to be a Mordecai, discerning and vocal, recognizing injustice before it becomes mainstream. You can choose to be an Esther, faithful, wise, and brave, willing to risk comfort and safety for the sake of others. And the third theological truth is that real transformation begins when injustice becomes personal. That's what turns the tide. We're no longer talking about abstract ideas or distant issues. We're talking about people, lives, stories, and faces. And that makes it hard to ignore. That's what Esther does. She doesn't present a policy argument. She names the threat to her life, to her people. She makes it personal. And when injustice becomes personal, it becomes undeniable. It's easy to tolerate systems of harm when they're just ideas out there somewhere. But when it is your neighbor, your child, your friend, then it demands a response. If you want to see transformation in your family, in your church, in your community, don't start with an argument. Start with a face. Start with a name and a story. That's what moves hearts, and that's what moves history. Esther didn't choose her crown, but she did choose how she wore it. She chooses to keep speaking long after her own life was safe. There are some traditions that say Esther is the one who writes this story. That would make her the only woman credited with authoring a book of the Bible. And if that's true, she didn't just save her people, she made sure the story would be told, that it would echo down throughout the generations. And if you've been navigating unjust systems, if you've felt the pressure to stay silent when you know you're being called to speak, then Esther's story is for you. You may not feel safe. You may wonder if your voice will even be heard, if you can make a difference. But Esther's story reminds us that no matter where we find ourselves, we are not powerless. We are positioned. We are called for such a time as this. So friend, if this video helped you see Esther in a new way, or maybe helped you see yourself in a new way, go ahead and subscribe. Stories like Esther's help us to name and reject toxic theology and harmful ideologies. They help us to reclaim our spiritual freedom in Christ and to move toward wholeness in our body, soul, and spirit. I release a new video every Thursday to help you reconnect with who God created you to be so that you can live your full and fulfilled life. Until next time, I'm praying that you nourish your body, heal your soul, and free your spirit. May you live full and fulfilled. I'll see you next time. Oh, and stay right here. YouTube is about to recommend another video that I think you'll love.